Gray here from Bitfinex Securities. Now today we're interviewing a pioneer within the crypto space. He is the creator of Hashcash, one of the earliest proof-of-work systems, and the co-founder and CEO of Blockstream, a leader in innovation and foresight for the entire Bitcoin ecosystem. Welcome, Dr. Adam Back. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you for coming on. Now, Adam, it's safe to say that you have a long pioneering career in cryptography. But what actually initially drew you to the industry?
So I was doing a PhD, and a friend of mine is doing a master's project in how to speed up RSA. So computers were a bit slower at the time, and making RSA encryption work fast was challenging. And so he was doing it on this parallel computer. And so I was just chatting to him about, well, what is that? What's it for? So that was how I came to know about RSA encryption, which is a public key cryptography. It was a very interesting thing. And so later PGP came out for encrypted emails, and that caused a lot of discussion because it was a way for individuals to communicate securely without, the establishment and the governments being able to decrypt your messages. And so that became a kind of interesting mix of sort of empowerment of the individual and reduction in drawing power away from the establishment and the state. So I found that fascinating, and that started me into spending more and more time on learning about applied cryptography instead of distributed systems, which was what my PhD was started out. That was the original topic.
Okay, interesting. And then what prompted you to create Hashcash in 1997, which we now know as the precursor to Bitcoin mining?
Yeah, so it's kind of mixture. From the interest in PGP and this kind of individual sovereignty, establishing rights using cryptography online, I went to find out, where are other people talking about this topic, and one of the more interesting places was the cypherpunks list. And so people were interested in all kinds of different applications, privacy, anonymous publishing, encrypted, like things like Tor, but this was before Tor, and of course electronic cash. And electronic cash was really difficult to bootstrap because people assumed initially that you'd need a partnership with a bank to be able to send money into it. And so I was actually running a remailer, which was a way to, it was kind of peer-to-peer network, allowing people to post anonymously on discussion lists and to send anonymous emails as well. And it tended to have a problem, which is people would spam through the remailer, and that would make the remailers unpopular. And so I was like, well, if only we had electronic cash working and if we really figured out how to do that without it being centralized, we could solve this, because, the fundamental problem with spam is that it's free to send email. And so people can just send millions of them and make money, even if only very few people are gullible enough to buy the stuff they're advertising. And so it caused me to think about, usually with spam, what people did then and still do is they try to blacklist the sender. So they blacklist their IP address or try to get them cancelled at the ISP if they're sending a lot of spam. And you just couldn't do this because it was anonymous by design. So you don't know who's sending it, you can't blacklist them. And so it caused me to think about it in a different way, which is like, well, okay, it's a pity we can't pay for it, but maybe we can do something similar, which is we can impose a cost on the sender. And so there are some areas of cryptography which are asymmetric, and so I ended up designing this Hashcash proof of work. So cash because it's like cash related, but based on hash functions, which is where the name comes from. And it started a discussion as well of how that could be used to actually make a respendable electronic cash. Hashcash is more like a postage stamp for an email. And so the discussion there was, well, this looks like digital gold. You're doing some intensive mining work to create a synthetic commodity, but in its current form factor, it's not respendable or scarce. So, that started some discussion about how you could achieve that, and it was technically challenging. Nick Szabo proposed BitGold about a year after Hashcash, and Wei Dai proposed B-Money, so they were sort of similar things. Basically, they're kind of sketches of roughly what Bitcoin looks like, but they had technical hurdles to overcome, and it basically took, it's not clear if Satoshi read all that stuff or realized the same solution using Hashcash, but the idea of using proof of work for mining was already thought about like very quickly after Hashcash, and by a year later there were a couple of kind of outline proposals, but they weren't quite implementable because they were designed.
Now you touched on Satoshi Nakamoto, and 2008, fast forward to then, he released his white paper, and he wrote, to implement a distributed timestamp server on a peer-to-peer basis, we will need to use a proof of work system similar to Adam Back's Hashcash. How does it feel to be immortalized by having your work referenced in arguably the most important document in cryptocurrency?
Well, it's pretty cool, and it gave me, so I heard about Bitcoin via Satoshi Nakamoto. Like he sent me an email asking about citation of the Hashcash paper, and we exchanged a few emails back in sort of late 2008, and it's if you have like open source software or like technical papers online, you'll get emails like that from time to time. So it's it didn't occur to me as actually that this person was anonymous even, right? I just thought that was his name. So that was curious. And I mean, going to technical conferences in the 2000s, people would recognize my name badge and say, "Oh yeah, you're the guy that did Hashcash," because Hashcash was known to a lot of programmers and internet technical people at that time, because the spam problem was like raging. There was so much spam going on, it was consuming like half of internet bandwidth, and it was a real kind of arms race and nuisance, and there was no real solution. So Hashcash was a kind of intriguing and novel solution. So anybody technical would tell their friends like, "Hey, you should read this. This is interesting," right? I mean, it didn't turn to be a robust solution to that, but it was a technically intriguing solution. So I was used to people like random people who I didn't know recognizing me and saying hello, kind of thing. So, but with Bitcoin, I didn't get that actively involved actually until 2013. But once I started going to conferences, it was the same thing but bigger, right? So people like recognize your name and say, and it gave me an instant fame in the Bitcoin space, which was kind of odd in a way, because I mean, you also bear in mind that a lot of time had passed, right? That was, Hashcash was what, 11 or 12 years before Bitcoin, and so it was quite old news to a lot of people, the Hashcash part of it. But it's certainly by far the most well-known use of Hashcash. But there are certainly a lot of technical people around who heard about it first in the anti-spam and postage stamp context. And the other curious thing is, in Bitcoin, the work factor is just millions of times more. So the stamps were designed to be, a couple of minutes on a laptop or something, whereas the Bitcoin stamps are just, industrial scale at this point due to the economics.
Yeah, it's funny because I assume that when you created or invented Hashcash back in the 90s, you would probably never even imagine that it would be used for such a thing like Bitcoin, right? Like, it's very, very unprecedented, especially like you said, the time scale between the two.
Right. I mean, people were definitely interested in seeing an electronic cash system with some privacy become available online. And there was a previous system before Hashcash without any work factor, and it was a bit centralized. It's called DigiCash, and it was a company by David Chorley. It had very strong privacy, but it was centralized, so it was operated on servers by that startup. And ultimately the startup didn't become a financial success, so the servers got wound down at some point. So if you had coins, you couldn't check if they were valid. So the failure of that centralized system caused people to think that they didn't give up. They took it as a lesson, like, oh, we need it to be decentralized so that it will survive any one individual or company leaving participation. And so there was discussion about that, but I'd say the problem was nobody had quite figured out how to make it work in a decentralized way. Like the B-Money and BitGold proposals were, they're very recognizably similar and close in some ways, but not quite. And of course, when you see Bitcoin and a description of how it works, in hindsight, it looks like you should have done it that way, right? I mean, the people that were thinking about it, but they didn't make the kind of leap of intuition or the discovery of how to do it. And I think the difficulty adjustment is one of the key things that nobody had quite figured out before Bitcoin.
Now, with most digital currencies, they have a central entity or a leader keeping track of every single user and how much money they have. But with Bitcoin, there is no such leader. And this is where proof of work comes in. But for people who don't really understand what proof of work is, would you be able to explain to us how it's able to secure the Bitcoin network?
So it does a couple of things. One is it's how new coins are introduced into the system. So as we were just discussing, there's no central party. And so the question is, how do you get coins if you join the system? So you could buy them from somebody else, but ultimately somebody has to have them first. And so the way that you get them is you buy some mining equipment and you mine them. So it's a kind of synthetic gold mining. And then that same work is actually fulfilling the second function, which is to sort of confirm transactions. So it's a peer-to-peer network. People are broadcasting transactions. The miners, they run some software that collects all the transactions in a block and does the work on that block. So it ends up building a history that's expensive to rewrite. So it makes it, so the transaction is basically final. You can't undo them. And that's unlike most other forms of electronic payment. It's a policy decision whether they undo a payment. Apart from physical cash, of course, if you drop a 20 bill on the street when you're drop it out your pocket by accident, there's no takebacks. Or if you pay for something in cash and you don't know who you bought it from, there's no takeback. So it does have that cash finality, but the proof of work, because it's all software and all virtual, something needs to make it final. And it's the proof of work that makes it final. And the reason is really that it would be expensive to undo it because you have to redo all that work. So as time passes, it becomes less and less realistic that it could be undone.
So there's also another mechanism, which is proof of stake. And I have a question for you, whether you prefer proof of work or proof of stake.
Yeah, I mean, I think a digital, like electronic currency, like that is a digital commodity, if you like, ultimately needs just economically, like not technically, but economically, I think it needs some inherent cost, because otherwise you fall back into the political system where there's a government that's printing money, and then it's lobbying and the usual political mess where people are vying to get money from the government, get contracts from the government, get bailouts from the government. And so I think anything that doesn't involve work tends to fall back to that kind of political money, which is, kind of misses the point, right? Because you want it to be decentralized and there to be no human involvement in the handing out of money. So I think and there are some sort of technical issues with proof of stake where, because there's no cost, it could in principle be redone for almost no cost. And so I think it's sort of less robust, prone to kind of technical attacks.
Okay, and but now moving on to Blockstream, of which you are the co-founder and CEO. Why did Blockstream get involved in mining, and was this a pivot from the software business?
So actually, we got involved in mining because we view it as important that Bitcoin mining is decentralized. So for it to be permissionless, you don't want, too few parties to have control, or it could fall back into a policy kind of led world. So you don't want, too much mining in one geography, too much mining under one company, that kind of thing. So we thought, well, if every, company, exchange, individual that is involved in Bitcoin does a small amount of mining, let's say 100 companies do 1% each with some size variance in different countries around the world and some individuals, that would be really quite decentralized. And so we wanted to do some to participate in that. And so we did, but actually, and then we branched out into also providing hosting for other people, so provide kind of data center hosting for other people's miners as well as our own. So, we started with our own miners. And actually, that was, in our original investment pitch, 2013, 2014, we did propose use of funds, some of the raised funds to be used for mining, but we didn't start on the mining immediately because it's kind of resource intensive. Doing mining at scale uses a lot of money basically, but it can be profitable.
Okay, and there's actually, well, I'm sure there's a current lurking fear in cryptocurrency communities about quantum computing. Do you think that there is a threat to Bitcoin mining with quantum computing?
With mining particularly, no, not really. So there are a few reasons for saying that. One is that quantum computing is sort of like, fusion power or something that people think will come in 50 years, but it always stays at 50 years. So, people are excited about the technological possibility, and there's incremental progress being made, but it still feels like super far in the future. And the current systems are sort of lab experimental equipment and are, far too small a scale to be useful, and actually are, far less powerful than the average desktop computer or something. So they're really kind of experiments and are not scaled up. And so I think that's one answer, that quantum computers are still probably decades away in a large enough scale to actually be applicable to weakening cryptography. And there are forms of cryptography that work even with quantum computers. So there's a possibility to change, signature algorithm and things like that. There are post-quantum signature algorithms which are actually quite old, and some more modern variants. And the other answer is that of the different types of cryptography, like public key encryption, digital signatures, and hash functions, the mining particularly uses hash functions, and those are, of those three types of cryptography, the least affected by quantum computers. So effectively the advantage a quantum computer has algorithmically in attacking hash collisions and hash inversions, the kind of thing that proof of work is doing, is it reduces the key size by the square root. So you can just double the key size and you're back to square one and it's fine. And the keys are already, the key size is, it's not really key size, it's the hash size or the amount of work to fully invert a hash function or something. So they're already quite large, so I don't think there's really that much to do. So if you said in 40 years quantum computers will become practical, they would be used to attack the digital signatures, and so Bitcoin would then need to add another new signature scheme. So this year it looks like Bitcoin will be adding Schnorr signatures, which is a different type of digital signature to that used to date. And so for the quantum computers, you'd want to add a third new optional signature algorithm and migrate to it before then. But even then, I think the proof of work will be fine because it's less affected. Hash functions are less affected by quantum computers.
Well, that's certainly reassuring to hear, I'm sure. It's been super interesting chatting with you today, and an absolute honor. Thank you so much for coming on the show and spending some time chatting with me today.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for everyone joining us today. I've been Alex Gray, your host for Bitfinex Securities, and until next time.